Hi again. Welcome back to Real Home Garage with Jimmy D. Today we're working on part 2 of our Mopar B-Body frame rail connectors. Since you were here last time, I've got my first frame rail connector in place and tack welded in place. Before I go on with that, let me talk. There's a couple things I talked about yesterday real quick. One was the tools. An important tool that I forgot was your standard 4-inch or 4.5-inch electric right angle grinder. This thing is invaluable. They're not real expensive. Again, you can find them from $39 up to a couple $100. I don't need a couple $100 one. This one I've had for quite a while. It's taken a beating, but it does a lot of nice grinding and some cutting where I need to get in there and without using my air tools. Second thing I'm going to talk about real quick is, again, my safety gear. Something, you notice I do wear my headset. I like my ears. But something I didn't point out is when you're buying a headset, or your wife's buying a headset, if you want to wear a face mask and you get with some of the headsets are fixed. They won't swivel. So when you put that headset on, you can't put your mask on. It comes over top, it's uncomfortable, and if gear is uncomfortable, you won't wear it, you won't use it, and it kind of defeats the purpose of having it. So the headset I like to use when I'm using my face mask is a headset like this that allows this headband to swivel. When it swivels, I can get it back out of the way, get it behind my head, and then I can put my headgear over top of it, protect my hearing, protect my eyes, and I find that to be a lot more comfortable for me. The next thing is, since we left, we were waiting for the primer to dry. This is the weld-through sim primer we talked about. I use zinc weld. It is a sim primer. Again, you spray that on before you start welding, let it dry. It's a couple coats. After you're done, you're going to have to go through and grind off the overspray because your normal paints won't stick to that overspray. So before you go in there and start, doing your body work and stuff, your Bondo, whatever you're going to use, don't leave this stuff on in those exposed areas. You want to grind it back. Okay. Now, when we left off, I was getting ready to weld the frame rail connector on, waiting for primer to dry. A couple things I did before I welded it on is here's the frame rail connector to the other side. First thing is you'll notice I drilled a series of 3/8-inch holes on each side of this frame rail connector and a couple up here on the front lip where it fits up over that frame front cross member for the torsion bar. The reason I do that is so I can put some what we call plug welds, rosette type welds, down through the frame. You're going to weld around the periphery with some tack welds or some stitch welding, we'll call it. But you also want to have these plug welds to add some additional strength to your installation. So again, I did 4 roughly spaced 3/8 holes on each side and 2 on the front. Then I went ahead and I started with my tack welds. Now I'm not done, but you don't need to weld this thing continuous, but you do need to weld it to the floorboard and to the frame rail. Now, before you go ahead and start welding, you want to make sure that anything flammable is out of the inside of that car. It should go without saying. You can't have your carpet in there. You can't have your jute padding. You can't have undercoating, sound deadening. That's got to be clean, bare metal, or else you'll be catching this place on fire. Not a good day. Wife won't understand. You have to build a new garage and get another project. So get this stuff out of the inside. Anything that's possibly flammable before you start welding. Now, again, I weld to both the rear frame section and the front frame section. I also do a weld about every 3 inches, a stitch weld, to the floorboard of the car. I've had people say, you don't need to weld it to the floorboard. I welded it front and back, that's all it takes. Well, they're not correct. And if you bear with me a minute, I'd like to go over to the bench and show you a real quick, simple example of why you need to weld this to the floor of the car. So let's go to the bench and I'll get to the whiteboard and a demonstration I've set up. Thank you. Well, before we get to our demonstration, I do have a couple of questions that have come up that I'd like to answer, solve some confusion with some of my watchers and listeners. First one is, how did I get the undercoating off the car? They're finding it plugs up their sandpaper. Yeah, at $1 a piece or $1.25 a piece for these sanding discs, they last about 10 seconds trying to take undercoating off. There's a lot of ways to do it. There are a lot of special type brushes sold. I think 3M has one that are specifically designed to go in your drill motor or in your rotary tool that highly abrasive, will knock a lot of that undercoating off. I have one. They're not inexpensive. They run about $7 to $10 a piece, and they don't last forever, but that's the first option. I have heard of people using a dry ice process. I've never used it myself. I really don't want to handle dry ice. It's rather dangerous to handle without proper gloves, but I know they've done it. They've frozen it, then hit it with a hammer, and it falls off. Again, not done it, but you can get on these other places on the internet. You probably can find somebody who's doing it and see if that works for you. What do? I basically heat it with a heat gun, and I use a scraper and a lot of elbow grease. Now that takes off most of the undercoat or sound deadening off these Mopowers. Some places it's pretty thick. I've found it up, ½ inch thick in places. Most of the places it's 1/8 to 1/4 inch. But again, I'll heat it with a heat gun and a scraper. Now, when you're doing that, wear a respirator. That stuff is dangerous. If you want to read something that's going to cause cancer and kill you, burning up some undercoating, which is a petroleum base, pretty high on the list. So wear your respirator. I use heat and a scraper, and then it ends up with a residue. Now there's a lot of chemicals on the market. Again, I think Eastwood sells one. I'm not sure who else. A lot of the auto places probably, that'll soften that final residue. I use kerosene myself. You got to be careful with disposal of the rags, wearing your gloves. And again, the flammability is a big concern, so don't be soaking your thing with kerosene and hitting it with your welder. So there's some ways to do it. You can research the internet, but again, my favorite is good old scraper and elbow grease. Then I get the residue, then I do a final sand. So that's how I get the undercoating off. Second question was position of the rail left and right. How do they position it? Well, in the back of the car, it's fixed for you because that rail fits over that frame rail. It's a channel that's going to go in one place and one place only, left and right. At the forward end, however, there's a lot of movement there. The way I position it is I use a scale. I measure from the pinch weld on the rocker panel to the edge of my rail and make it parallel with the rocker panel. I think it's running about 8 3/4, 8 5/8 of an inch left to right on the car, but I run it parallel, so I hook it at the back, square it up with the rocker panel, pinch weld, and then tack it at front, and then go ahead and weld it. So that's how I position left and right. The next question was the rails they have don't contact the floorboard except in a couple spots. And how do they weld the big gap? You don't weld the big gap. What you're going to need to do is I weld where they contact. I do a couple stitch welds. I go in the car with my soft hammer or my body hammer, and I tap and form that floorboard down a little at a time till it contacts. I go back and stitch weld, move forward or move back from there, tap it down, and I do that along the full length of the rail, inside and out or left and right on each rail, to get enough contact points so that I can get a stitch weld about every 3 inches. It takes some time. You're in and out and in and out, in and out, but that's how you get a good contact, a good weld surface. Don't try to weld that big gap. The other thing when you're welding is your frame connectors are significantly thicker than your floorboards of your car. If you keep your heat penetration right down the seam, you're going to burn holes all through that floorboard. I focus my heat more on the rail and then work to the floorboard back and forth, so I'm getting most of the heat toward the frame rail and not burning holes in my car. The last question was, I don't weld it full length, and what do I do with the rest of the gap? I actually use your normal body seam sealers that you use when you're installing a floorboard or some of the other places your body before paint. I go along the edge of the seam where it contacts the floor of the frame where it's open. I fill that with a paintable seam sealer. Don't seal the bottom of your channels. You're going to find when you buy them, they have the big holes in them, the forming holes, and then they have little slots where they're formed all the way up the edge. Leave those open. That allows for drainage. You're going to get moisture in there. I don't care how good you are, how you seal it. It's going to get moisture just from condensation. you want to leave that open at the bottom away from the floorboard so anything you get in you can clean out or drain out. So again, there's a couple questions I've received. I hope those answers help you out. So we'll get to our demonstration here on the floorboard on why you want to weld it in full contact with the floor with the stitch welds. So I'll see you in a minute. Thank you. Okay, here we are at the workbench. As I was talking, the frame rail connectors will add a lot of stiffness to your car, but the connector itself is a U-shaped channel, which in certain load conditions is not stable. What I mean by that is you have this U-shaped channel that you're putting up against the floorboard. Well, this upper point right here is not connected to anything. So as you apply load on this channel, this thing will want to bow in or bow out, and you'll end up deforming or failing that channel. So what you end up wanting to do is close this channel by welding it to the floorboard. You close it and you make a box out of it. A box is far stronger than a channel. To show you, demonstrate that, first of all, here's your floorboard. This little piece of Cheerios box. My angles will represent the frame on each end. Okay? If I take a simple, this is about a 2-ounce socket, put it on my floorboard, that simulates the load being put into that floorboard from your car. Now granted, your car has rocker panels and roof, but for the point of this demonstration, I just want to show the difference the channel makes, the frame connector makes, and the difference between a frame connector that is welded to the floorboard or not welded to the floorboard. So that's 2 ounces right there. So let's take our floorboard away. I've made 2 almost identical samples. Again, out of Cheerio box, they're exact same width, exact same length, exact same material. The only difference between these two is this one is unsupported except at the ends to the floorboard. My second sample, you notice I got 2 pieces of cheap tape on here to simulate a weld to the floorboard in just a couple of stitch welds. So here's my frame rail connector. Of course, you put that socket on there, nothing happens. Let's move up to a 1-pound weight. Quite a difference. Let's move up to a 3-pound weight. Fairly well supported, starting to bow a little bit. I know you can't see it on the camera. Now we're going to go up to a 5-pound weight. You notice the floorboard is starting to fail. You can see the curve in the floorboard. Let's take it to 8 pounds. We have total failure. That's 8 pounds. You see the buckle in the channel. There was nothing supporting that channel in that area. Now, so much for that car. Here's our one. 2 pieces of tape. Now, I've done this before. It's the first time I'm going to do it. So we're just going to see what happens. Of course, the 1-pound weight. I don't want people to say, oh, he preloaded it or did something wrong. 3-pound weight. Let's put our big weight on there. Let's add another pound to it. Okay. How about we make it 8 pounds? Great. Let's make it 20 pounds. 21 pounds. 21 pounds. Held. It held 20. There's a lot of difference. You had that, and that. And that supported it with 2 little pieces of tape, tying that channel to that floorboard versus that. So we're over twice the load that took on a simple cardboard box to demonstrate how welding that floorboard makes a big difference in the stiffness and the strength of your chassis by doing that. So there's how I weld to the floor. I hope that's some education for you. And I look forward to your comments. If you don't think I did something right, you can put it on whatever that, Mythbusters or whatever. But these are pretty much simple engineering facts. So thank you again. I'm going to go back to the car. We're going to keep welding and keep going. But for now, that'll be all for part 1 and part 2 of our frame rail installation. I'm going to do some final welding. Part 3 will come back where you'll see the final installation, and we will start looking at the torque box installation on the B-Body. Torque box are some plates that go front and rear to tie some additional strength between the rocker panels and the frame to the suspension points of the car. So until part 3, I will see you later. This is Real Home Garage with Jimmy D. Thank you.